The Montana wind cut through Rebecca's threadbare shawl as she stood outside the general store in Silver Ridge, her trembling fingers clutching the only thing of value she had left, her mother's silver locket. Inside, warmth and the smell of fresh bread mocked her empty stomach. She hadn't eaten in 2 days. The burns that stretched across the left side of her face throbbed in the cold. 6 months ago, her husband had come home drunk and knocked over the oil lamp during one of his rages. She'd survived the fire. He hadn't. And now the whole town whispered that she was cursed, unmarriageable, untouchable. Before we continue with Rebecca's journey, I'd love to ask you to take a moment to subscribe to the channel and give this video a like. It truly means so much to us and motivates us to bring you more quality stories like this one. Also, I'm curious, where are you listening from right now? Let us know in the comments. You gonna stand there all day freezing, or you gonna come inside? Rebecca turned to find a tall man watching her from the store's doorway. He wore a worn leather jacket and a black Stetson that shadowed eyes the color of storm clouds. Everything about him spoke of hard work and harder winters, broad shoulders that filled the doorframe, hands scarred from years of ranch work, and a face weathered by sun and wind. I don't have money," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. She held up the locket. "But I have this. It's real silver. I just need some food." The man stepped closer, and Rebecca instinctively turned her scarred cheek away. She'd grown accustomed to people's reactions, the gasps, the stares, the poorly concealed disgust. But he didn't flinch. Instead, he looked at the locket, then back at her face, his expression unreadable. "Keep your locket," he said quietly. "What's your name?" "Rebecca. Rebecca Cole. Cole." His jaw tightened. "You're William Cole's widow." She nodded, waiting for the judgment, the rejection. Everyone knew William. Everyone knew what kind of man he'd been. "I'm James Morrison. I own the Bar M Ranch about 10 miles north." He pushed open the store door. "Come on, we'll get you fed, and then you're coming with me." I don't." "You got anywhere else to go?" The truth sat heavy between them. She shook her head. Then it settled. He ushered her inside, where the warmth immediately made her bones ache. "Charlie, put together supplies for the lady. Charge it to my account." The store owner, a rotund man with suspicious eyes, glanced at Rebecca's face and frowned. "Morrison, you sure about this? That woman's got a reputation for surviving." James's voice dropped to a dangerous quiet. "For enduring what no person should have to. Yeah, Charlie, I'm sure. Now get the supplies." 20 minutes later, Rebecca sat in James's wagon, a basket of food at her feet and her mind reeling. The landscape rolled past in shades of gold and brown, mountains rising in the distance like sleeping giants. She nibbled on a piece of bread, hardly believing it was real. "Why are you helping me?" she finally asked. James kept his eyes on the trail ahead. "I need help at the ranch. My housekeeper passed last month, and I can't cook worth a damn. You can cook, can't you?" "Yes, but—" "Then we've got an arrangement. You work, you earn your keep. Fair wages, your own room, and nobody will bother you out there. People say I'm cursed. People say a lot of things." He glanced at her then, really looked at her. "Most of it's horse shit." The Bar M Ranch appeared as the sun began its descent, painting the sky in shades of crimson and gold. It was larger than Rebecca had expected, a sturdy 2-story house, a massive barn, corrals holding dozens of horses, and several outbuildings. Everything spoke of careful maintenance and pride in ownership. "It's beautiful," she breathed. "It's home." James helped her down from the wagon, his hands strong and steady on her waist. For a moment they stood close enough that she could smell leather and sage on him, could see the small scar above his left eyebrow. "Come on, I'll show you your room, and then maybe you can salvage whatever I was attempting to call dinner." The house's interior was surprisingly clean, if sparse. Functional furniture, a stone fireplace, windows that let in the dying light. He led her upstairs to a small room with a bed, a dresser, and a window overlooking the mountains. "It's not much, but it's yours," James said from the doorway. "Bathroom's down the hall. Take your time settling in." That first dinner was a quiet affair. Rebecca had salvaged his attempted stew, turning it into something edible with the addition of herbs and proper seasoning. They ate at the kitchen table, the silence broken only by the crackle of the fire and the distant howl of coyotes. "You don't have to hide it," James said suddenly. Rebecca's hand went instinctively to her scarred cheek, where she'd let her hair fall forward to cover it. "People prefer not to see." "I'm not people." He set down his spoon. "And I'm not William Cole." The name hung between them like a ghost. Rebecca felt tears prick her eyes, but refused to let them fall. "You don't know what he was like." "I know enough. I know he was thrown out of every saloon in 3 counties for violence. I know the sheriff looked the other way too many times." His voice hardened. "And I know that fire wasn't an accident, no matter what the official report said." Rebecca's breath caught. No one had ever said it out loud before. "You survived, Rebecca. That takes more courage than most men I know possess." He stood, carrying his plate to the basin. "Get some rest. Tomorrow I'll show you the ranch properly." The days fell into a rhythm. Rebecca woke before dawn to prepare breakfast, and James taught her the routines of ranch life. She learned to feed the chickens, to milk the cows, to recognize the different horses by their temperaments. In return, she transformed the house from a bachelor's utilitarian space into a home. Curtains in the windows, flowers from the meadow in mason jars, meals that made James close his eyes in appreciation. But it was the small moments that undid her careful walls. The way James always entered a room slowly, making noise so he wouldn't startle her. How he never raised his voice, even when a horse threw him or a fence needed emergency repair. The morning she found a bouquet of wildflowers on the kitchen table with no note, no explanation. "You didn't have to," she said that evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. "Wanted to." He stretched his long legs out, his shoulder nearly touching hers. "You make this place feel like it's worth something again. It was always worth something. Not to me, not since." He trailed off, jaw working. "Since. My wife died 3 years ago, childbirth, the baby too." The words came out flat, emotionless, but Rebecca heard the ocean of grief beneath them. "I blame myself. Still do some days." Without thinking, Rebecca reached over and took his hand. His fingers closed around hers, warm and strong. "It wasn't your fault. Wasn't yours either. What happened to you?" They sat like that as darkness fell, hands clasped, 2 broken people finding unexpected comfort in shared silence. The trouble came on a Tuesday afternoon in late September. Rebecca was hanging laundry when she heard horses approaching fast. 3 men she didn't recognize rode into the yard, their eyes hard and calculating. "Where's Morrison?" the leader demanded. He had a cruel mouth and a scar that ran from his eye to his jaw. "In the north pasture," Rebecca said, keeping her voice steady despite her racing heart. "Can I give him a message?" The man dismounted, moving too close. "You can give him a message, all right. Tell him Cyrus Wade wants his answer by Friday, or things are going to get real unpleasant." "I don't know what Wade wants this land. He's made Morrison a fair offer. Time to accept it." His eyes raked over her, lingering on her scars. "Though I can see why he'd want to stay. Got himself a scarred little whore keeping him warm at night." Rage, hot and clean, surged through Rebecca. She'd spent months being afraid, being small. Not anymore. "Get off this property, now." The man laughed and reached for her arm. He never made contact. James appeared as if materialized from air itself. his hand catching the man's wrist in an iron grip. "Touch her, and I'll break every bone in your hand." "Morrison, you heard the lady. Get off my property." Each word was a bullet. "And you tell Wade that my answer is the same as it's always been. He can go to hell." The three men left in a cloud of dust and muttered threats. James watched until they disappeared over the ridge, then turned to Rebecca. "You all right?" "I'm fine." But she wasn't. She was shaking, adrenaline making her dizzy. "Who's Cyrus Wade?" "A land-grabbing bastard who thinks money can buy anything." James's hands were gentle as they steadied her shoulders. "He's been trying to force me out for 2 years. This land has water rights he wants. Will he come back? Probably." His eyes were serious. "Rebecca, if you want to leave, I'll understand. This might get dangerous." She thought of the silver locket still in her trunk upstairs, her mother's voice echoing across the years. "We don't run from hard things, Rebecca. We face them." She thought of the life she'd built here in just a few weeks, the first peace she'd known in years. "I'm not going anywhere," she said firmly. "This is my home too." Something shifted in James's expression, surprise, respect, and something warmer that made her breath catch. "Then we face it together." That night, James taught her to shoot. They stood in the meadow behind the barn, the last light fading from the sky. He positioned the rifle in her hands, standing behind her to adjust her stance. "Breathe out slowly. Squeeze the trigger. Don't pull it." Rebecca felt his chest against her back, his hands guiding hers, and tried to focus on the target rather than the way her body responded to his nearness. She fired. The can on the fence post flew backward. "Again," James said, his breath warm against her ear. They practiced until full darkness fell and her shoulder ached from the recoil. As they walked back to the house, James said quietly, "You're a natural." "I had good motivation to learn." She looked up at him, at the strong line of his jaw, the way moonlight caught in his dark hair. "Thank you for everything, for seeing me as more than..." More than what? More than damaged goods, more than cursed. James stopped walking. He reached up and gently tucked her hair back, fully exposing her scarred cheek to the moonlight. His fingers traced the damaged skin with such tenderness that tears sprang to her eyes. "My face has scars," she whispered, the words catching in her throat. "That's all right." His voice was rough with emotion. "I need pure love and truth, not luxury. And these..." He touched the scars again. "These are proof you survived. Proof you're stronger than anything life threw at you. They're beautiful because they're part of you." Rebecca couldn't breathe, couldn't think past the roaring in her ears. "James, I'm falling in love with you, Rebecca Cole." The confession came out raw and honest. "Have been since the moment you stood up to me outside that store, since you took on this ranch like you'd been born to it, since you made this empty house into a home again." "I'm broken," she whispered. "I have nightmares. Sometimes I flinch at shadows. I'm human. You're human and you're perfect, and I want you to stay, not as my housekeeper, as my partner, my equal." He took her hands. "I'm not asking you to give me an answer now. I just needed you to know." Before she could respond, a gunshot cracked through the night. They both dropped instinctively, James covering her body with his. Another shot, then another, peppering the dirt around them. In the distance, flames erupted from the barn. "The horses!" Rebecca screamed. "Stay down!" James was already moving, keeping low as he ran toward the burning structure. Rebecca ignored his command and followed, her heart in her throat. The barn was an inferno. Inside, horses screamed in terror. James kicked open the main door, smoke billowing out. "Open the corral gates!" he shouted to Rebecca. "Get them out as they come through." She ran to the corrals, fumbling with the latches even as bullets continued to kick up dirt around the property. In the chaos, she saw riders on the ridge. Wade's men, watching their handiwork. James emerged from the barn leading 3 panicked horses, his face streaked with soot. He went back in, came out with 2 more, went back in again. The structure groaned, timbers beginning to collapse. James still hadn't emerged. Rebecca didn't think. She grabbed a water-soaked blanket from the trough and ran into the inferno. The heat was suffocating, the smoke so thick she couldn't see. "James!" she screamed. "James!" A cough answered her. She followed the sound, feeling her way through the burning building until she found him. He was trapped under a fallen beam, his leg pinned, unconscious or close to it. With strength born of pure desperation, Rebecca heaved at the beam. It shifted slightly. She heaved again, screaming with the effort, and it rolled free. She grabbed James under the arms and dragged him toward what she hoped was the door. They collapsed outside just as the barn roof caved in with a roar. Rebecca kept dragging James away from the flames, away from the falling debris, until they reached the relative safety of the yard. "James, James, please!" She checked his pulse. Steady, thank God. His leg was badly burned, bleeding from a deep gash. She tore strips from her skirt and bound the wound, her hands steady despite her terror. His eyes fluttered open. "Rebecca? I'm here. I've got you." "The horses? Safe. Most of them are safe." She cradled his head in her lap, tears streaming down her face. "Don't you ever do that again. Don't you dare leave me." His hand came up to touch her face, trembling, not planning on it. The next days were a blur. The sheriff came, took statements, promised to arrest Wade and his men. Neighbors arrived to help with the cleanup, bringing supplies and sympathy. Through it all, Rebecca nursed James back to health, changing his bandages, forcing him to rest despite his protests. "I should be up helping," he grumbled from the bed she'd insisted he stay in. "You have a broken leg and 2nd-degree burns," Rebecca said firmly, adjusting his pillows. "You're staying put. Bossy woman. You like it." She sat on the edge of the bed, taking his hand. "James, what you said before the fire, I meant every word." His grey eyes were serious. "I know it's fast. I know you have every reason to be cautious, but I've never been more certain of anything in my life." "I'm afraid," Rebecca admitted. "I'm afraid of letting myself hope, afraid of trusting again, afraid that I'll wake up and this will all be a dream." "Then let me prove it's real." James struggled to sit up, wincing. "Go slow. It hurts, but I need to do this properly." "James, lie down." "No." He reached into the nightstand drawer and pulled out a small box. "I bought this 3 weeks ago. Been carrying it around like a fool, waiting for the right moment." He opened the box. Inside was a simple gold band with a small sapphire. "It was my grandmother's, the only valuable thing my family ever owned." His voice shook slightly. "Rebecca Cole, you are the strongest, bravest, most beautiful woman I've ever known. Your scars don't define you. Your courage does. Your kindness does. Will you marry me? Will you build this life with me as true partners?" Rebecca looked at this man who had given her back her dignity, her strength, her ability to trust, who had never once treated her as less than whole, who had seen past the scars to the woman beneath. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, James Morrison, I'll marry you." The kiss they shared was gentle, tentative, full of promise. When they pulled apart, both were crying. "Together," James said, echoing the word that had become their touchstone over the past weeks. "Together," Rebecca agreed. They married 3 weeks later, after James could walk without crutches. The ceremony was held on the ranch, with half of Silver Ridge in attendance. Rebecca wore a simple white dress she'd sewn herself and wildflowers in her hair. James wore his best suit and couldn't stop staring at his bride. When the preacher asked if anyone objected, there was only supportive silence. The town had watched Rebecca transform from a frightened widow into a confident woman. They'd seen James Morrison come back to life. No one would stand in the way of that. "I now pronounce you husband and wife." The kiss they shared was met with cheers and applause. As they turned to face their friends and neighbors, Rebecca caught sight of her reflection in the window. Her scarred face, smiling wider than she'd ever thought possible, James's arm around her waist. The scars were still there. They always would be, but they were no longer all she saw when she looked at herself. Now, she saw a survivor, a fighter, a woman who had found love in the last place she expected. That night, in the home they'd built together, James traced every scar on her face with gentle kisses. "These," he whispered between each touch, "are proof that you're mine, that you survived long enough to find me. I'll spend every day of my life being grateful for them." Rebecca pulled him close, marveling at the journey that had brought her here. From that desperate moment outside the general store to this bed, this man, this life. "I love you," she said, the words coming easily now. "Not despite everything that happened, but because it led me here, to you." "To us," James corrected, and kissed her again. 5 years later, the Bar M Ranch thrived. The new barn stood even stronger than the old one, and the corrals were full of the finest horses in Montana. Rebecca had expanded her role from housekeeper to full partner, her head for numbers and organization, transforming their operation into one of the most successful in the territory. But more than that, the house rang with laughter. Their daughter, Emily, 3 years old with her father's grey eyes and her mother's determination, played in the yard while Rebecca hung laundry and James worked with a new colt. "Mama, look!" Emily held up a dandelion like it was pure gold. "Beautiful, sweetheart." Rebecca knelt down, accepting the flower with appropriate reverence. "Like your face, Mama." Emily traced the scars with her tiny fingers, the way she'd seen her father do 100 times. "You have pretty marks." Rebecca's throat tightened with emotion. "Thank you, baby." James appeared at her shoulder, pulling her close. "She's right, you know. Everything about you is beautiful." Rebecca leaned into her husband's embrace, watching their daughter chase butterflies through the meadow. The scars on her face caught the sunlight, and she didn't turn away. She'd learned that love wasn't about perfection, it was about truth, about seeing someone fully, scars and all, and choosing them anyway, about building something real from broken pieces. And that, she thought, as James pressed a kiss to her temple, was worth more than all the luxury in the world. The 7th year of their marriage brought unexpected challenges. A harsh winter had decimated their cattle herd, and spring rains failed to come. The once green pastures turned brown and brittle, and the creek that fed their land slowed to a trickle. James stood at the fence line, his jaw tight with worry as he surveyed the parched landscape. Rebecca came up beside him, 5-year-old Emily on her hip, and their newborn son, Thomas, wrapped in a sling against her chest. "How bad is it?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. "Bad enough that we might have to sell off more stock." He rubbed his face wearily. "Maybe even some of the land." "No." Rebecca's voice was firm. "We don't sell the land. This ranch is Emily and Thomas's legacy. We'll find another way." James looked at his wife, her scarred face set with determination, her eyes blazing with the same fire that had made him fall in love with her. "What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking about that silver locket I never sold." She shifted Thomas to her other shoulder. "And I'm thinking about the horses, not the working stock, the wild mustangs you've been training. Rich folks back east pay good money for well-trained horses. Rebecca, that's your mother's locket. My mother would have understood that family comes first." She touched his arm. "We're a team. Remember, we face things together." Over the next months, they worked harder than ever. James spent long days breaking and training the wild horses he'd caught the previous summer, transforming them from untamed spirits into magnificent mounts. Rebecca handled the business side, writing letters to buyers in Denver, San Francisco, and even as far as New York, advertising their stock. Meanwhile, she also began taking in sewing work from the ladies in town. Her scarred hands proved just as skilled with a needle as they were with ranch work. The money came in slowly, but it came. One evening, as James worked with a particularly stubborn gelding in the corral, a stranger rode up to the ranch. He was well-dressed, his horse clearly expensive stock, and he carried himself with the bearing of someone used to wealth. "Can I help you?" Rebecca called from the porch, automatically positioning herself between the stranger and where Emily played in the yard. "Mrs. Morrison?" The man dismounted with practiced ease. "My name is Edward Hartley. I've come from Denver regarding your horses." Rebecca's heart leaped. She'd sent Hartley a letter 3 weeks ago, but hadn't expected a response, much less a personal visit. "Mr. Hartley, please come in. I'll fetch my husband." Within the hour, James had shown Hartley their string of trained horses. The man walked among them with an expert eye, examining teeth, checking legs, observing temperament. Finally, he turned to James with an approving nod. "Your wife undersold these animals in her letter," Hartley said. "These are some of the finest horses I've seen west of the Mississippi. I'll take all 8 of them at twice your asking price." James and Rebecca exchanged a look of pure relief. "Twice?" James repeated. "And I'll want first pick of any future stock you train." Hartley pulled out a leather wallet. "I supply horses to several wealthy families and businesses. If the quality remains this high, I can guarantee regular sales." That night, after the children were asleep and Hartley had ridden away with his new horses and a contract for future business, James pulled Rebecca into his arms. "You saved us," he whispered into her hair. "You and that brilliant mind of yours. We saved us." She corrected. "Your skill with horses, my business sense. Together, remember?" "Together," he agreed, and kissed her deeply. The money from Hartley's purchase, combined with Rebecca's sewing income and the sale of her mother's locket to the bank president's wife for a considerable sum, was enough to see them through the drought. When the rains finally came that fall, the ranch bloomed back to life. The trouble with Cyrus Wade hadn't ended with the barn burning. If anything, it had only made him more determined to acquire the Bar M ranch. His methods became more subtle, but no less dangerous. It started with poisoned water troughs that killed 3 of their cattle, then fences cut in the night, allowing livestock to wander onto Wade's property, where he claimed them as his own. Small fires set in the far pastures, equipment sabotaged. James reported each incident to Sheriff Marcus, but evidence was scarce, and Wade was careful to never be directly implicated. The law's hands were tied. "He's trying to bleed us dry," James said one night, his frustration palpable. "Death by 1,000 cuts." Rebecca set down her sewing, her mind already working through possibilities. "Then we need to catch him in the act. We need proof. He's too smart for that. He sends his men to do the dirty work. So we make him think we're vulnerable. We make him bold." Rebecca's eyes gleamed with the kind of strategic thinking that had saved their ranch before. "We set a trap." James listened as his wife outlined her plan. It was risky, potentially dangerous, but it was also brilliant. "You sure about this?" he asked when she finished. "No," she admitted, "but doing nothing isn't an option. He won't stop until he has our land, or we're dead. I won't let him win, James. I won't let him take what we've built." The trap was simple but effective. They let it be known in town that James would be traveling to Denver for a week on business, leaving Rebecca alone at the ranch with just the children and one elderly ranch hand. They made sure the gossip reached Wade's ears through carefully planted conversations at the general store and saloon. In reality, James never left. He and 3 trusted friends from neighboring ranches hid in the hills, overlooking the property, watching and waiting. Wade took the bait. 3 nights after James's supposed departure, 6 men rode onto the Bar M property under cover of darkness. Rebecca watched from the darkened house, her rifle ready as they approached the main house. She'd sent Emily and Thomas to stay with James's sister in town, refusing to put them at risk. The men spread out, 2 heading for the corrals, 2 for the barn, and 2 toward the house. Rebecca's heart hammered in her chest, but her hands were steady as she aimed through the window. Just as the men reached the porch, James and his friends emerged from concealment. "That's far enough," James called out, his voice carrying across the yard. His rifle was trained on the nearest intruder. "Drop your weapons!" The men froze. One started to reach for his gun. "I wouldn't!" Rebecca's voice came from the doorway. She stepped into view, her rifle pointed at the man's chest. "My husband taught me to shoot, and I don't miss." Sheriff Marcus emerged from the barn, where he'd been hiding as part of the plan. "Evening, boys. Funny meeting you here." His deputies flanked him, weapons drawn. "Now, I wonder what Mr. Wade would say if he knew you were caught trespassing on the Morrison property, armed and with clear intent to cause harm." One of Wade's men, a Weasley character named Pike, cracked almost immediately. "Wade sent us. He said to burn the house this time, make sure there was nothing left worth fighting for." "Is that so?" Marcus smiled grimly. "Well then, I think Mr. Wade and I need to have us a conversation." The arrest of Cyrus Wade sent shockwaves through Silver Ridge and the surrounding counties. A man of his wealth and influence, brought down by his own greed and the courage of one couple who refused to be intimidated. The trial was swift. Pike and 2 other men testified against Wade in exchange for lighter sentences, and the evidence was overwhelming. Wade was sentenced to 15 years in territorial prison. His land holdings were divided up and sold, with James and Rebecca given first option to purchase the parcels adjacent to their property at fair market value. "Justice," Rebecca said, standing beside James in the courtroom as the sentence was read. Finally. But justice came with a cost. That night, as they lay in bed, James pulled Rebecca close. "You could have been killed," he said quietly. "If things had gone wrong, they didn't. We were smart about it. We had backup." She turned to face him, her scarred cheek pressed against his chest. "I know you want to protect me, James, but I'm not the frightened woman you met outside that general store anymore. I'm your partner, your equal. That means I stand with you, not behind you." James was quiet for a long moment. Then he kissed her forehead. "I know, and I love you for it, even when it terrifies me." "Good," Rebecca said with a soft laugh, "because I have no intention of changing." 8 years into their marriage, Rebecca received a letter that turned her world upside down. It came from a lawyer in Boston, written on expensive paper in elegant script. "Dear Mrs. Morrison," it began, "I represent the estate of your father, Mr. Harold Bennett." Rebecca's hands shook so badly she had to sit down to continue reading. Her father. She hadn't seen or heard from him in nearly 15 years, not since she'd run away at 17 to escape the marriage he'd arranged to a cruel, wealthy man 3 times her age. She'd changed her name, disappeared into the vast Western territories, and eventually married William Cole out of desperation and loneliness. "Rebecca, what is it?" James came in from outside, his shirt dusty from working with the horses. He took one look at her pale face and crossed the room in 2 strides. "What's wrong?" "My father died." She looked up at him, her eyes swimming with complicated emotions. "And he left me everything. His estate, his business interests, his properties. According to this, I'm wealthy, James. Very wealthy." James read the letter over her shoulder. The figures mentioned were staggering, enough to buy 10 ranches the size of the Bar M, with money left over for generations. "There's more," Rebecca continued, her voice shaky. "He's been looking for me for years. After I disappeared, He called off the arranged marriage and tried to find me. The lawyer says he spent a fortune on investigators. He wanted to apologize, to make amends. A tear slid down her scarred cheek. And I never knew. I never gave him the chance. James held her as she wept for the father she'd lost twice, once when she ran away, and now forever. They talked late into the night about what the inheritance meant, about the choices they faced. We could move back east, James said carefully, give the children advantages we never dreamed of. Education, society, opportunities. Is that what you want? Rebecca asked. James looked around their home, simple but filled with love, with memories, with the life they'd built from nothing. I want you to be happy. I want our children to have every opportunity. But this ranch, this life, it's who I am, Rebecca. I don't know if I could be that man in a Boston parlor. I don't want you to be that man. Rebecca took his hands. I fell in love with a Montana rancher who saw past my scars to the woman beneath, who taught me that home isn't about luxury, it's about truth and love and building something real. So what do we do with a fortune? James asked with a wry smile. Over the following weeks, they made their decisions. They would keep the ranch. It was their heart, their home. But they would use the inheritance to secure their children's futures, to establish trust funds for Emily and Thomas and any future children. They would expand the ranch's operations, hire more hands, build better facilities. And Rebecca would establish something she'd been dreaming about since the day Cyrus Wade's men had called her a whore, a foundation to help women escaping abusive situations, a place where they could find shelter, legal assistance, job training, and support, a place that would give them the same second chance she'd found. We'll call it Bennett House, she said, sketching out plans at the kitchen table. In honor of my father. A way for his money to do the good he wanted to do in life. James looked at his wife with renewed awe. You're going to change lives, Rebecca. We're going to change lives, she corrected. Together. The first Bennett house opened in Silver Ridge, 18 months later. It was a large Victorian building on Main Street, staffed by a matron, a nurse and a lawyer who worked pro bono. Within the first month, 7 women had come through its doors, finding safety and support. One of them was a young woman named Sarah, her face bearing fresh bruises, and her 2 small children clinging to her skirts. Rebecca sat with her in the parlor, holding her hands, and said the same words James had once said to her. You're not property. You're a person, and you're worth saving. Sarah wept and whispered, But I'm broken. Rebecca gently turned her scarred cheek to the light. We're all broken in some way. But broken doesn't mean worthless. It means we've survived something, and survival takes incredible strength. That night, James found Rebecca standing in the nursery, watching Thomas and Emily sleep. Their daughter was 7 now, bright and fearless. Their son was 4, gentle and curious like his father. What are you thinking about? James asked, wrapping his arms around her waist from behind. I'm thinking about how far we've come, how that frightened woman outside the general store could never have imagined this life. She leaned back against him. I'm thinking about all the women who will pass through Bennett House, and how I hope they find even half the happiness I've found. You've earned every bit of that happiness, James said softly. You've taken your pain and turned it into purpose. That's not just survival, Rebecca. That's transformation. She turned in his arms, looking up at the man who had given her back herself. I love you, James Morrison, for seeing me when I was invisible, for loving me when I was unlovable, for standing beside me as I became who I was meant to be. You were always that person, he replied. I just helped you remember. They stood together in the quiet house, 2 souls who had found each other in the darkest moments and built something luminous from the wreckage of their pasts. 10 years after their wedding, the Bar M Ranch was the most prosperous spread in Montana territory. James had expanded their horse breeding operation, and their stock was now sought after across the country. Rebecca's business acumen had transformed them from simple ranchers into entrepreneurs, with investments in mining operations, timber rights, and real estate. But more important than wealth was the family they'd built. Emily, now 9, could ride as well as any ranch hand and had inherited her mother's sharp mind for figures. Thomas, at 6, showed his father's gentle way with animals, and their youngest 3-year-old Margaret was a whirlwind of energy and joy who kept them all on their toes. Bennett House had also grown. There were now 3 locations, Silver Ridge, Billings, and Helena, and plans for 2 more. Hundreds of women had passed through their doors, finding safety, legal help, and job training. Some had moved on to new lives, others had stayed in the communities, becoming teachers, shopkeepers, and respected members of society. Rebecca had also begun writing. Her memoir, Scars and Survival, a Montana Story, had been published back east and was creating waves in social reform circles. She wrote honestly about her experiences with abuse, about the fire that had marked her, about finding unexpected love and building a new life. The book brought her both acclaim and criticism. Some praised her bravery. Others suggested a woman should keep such things private. Rebecca didn't care. If her story helped even one woman find the courage to leave an abusive situation, it was worth any amount of judgment. One spring morning, a telegram arrived that brought back ghosts from Rebecca's past. It was from William Cole's brother, Marcus, whom she'd never met. Must speak with you urgently regarding William coming to Silver Ridge. Rebecca showed the telegram to James, her old fears flickering to life. What could he possibly want after all these years? Whatever it is, we'll handle it together, James assured her. Marcus Cole arrived 3 days later. He was nothing like William, refined where his brother had been rough, educated where William had been ignorant, kind where William had been cruel. He was also clearly uncomfortable. Mrs. Morrison, or should I say, Mrs. Cole. Morrison, Rebecca said firmly. I was William's wife for 8 months. I've been James's wife for 10 years. I'm Mrs. Morrison. Marcus nodded respectfully. Mrs. Morrison, then. I've come to apologize on behalf of my family. I was in Europe when William died, when he hurt you. I didn't know about his violence until recently, when I was going through family papers. He pulled out a stack of letters. William wrote to me for years. I never responded because I'd cut him off after he was thrown out of the family for gambling and drink. But these letters... He looked sick. They detail everything he did to you. The beatings, the cruelty, and finally the fire. He confessed it all, Mrs. Morrison. The fire wasn't an accident. He set it deliberately, hoping to kill you, but got caught in it himself. The room went silent. Rebecca felt James's hand close around hers, anchoring her. I know the official report ruled it accidental, Marcus continued. My family paid for that ruling, I'm ashamed to say. They wanted to avoid scandal, but I cannot let that injustice stand. He held out a legal document. This is a sworn confession written before witnesses, along with corroborating evidence. It formally clears you of any suspicion related to William's death and acknowledges what he did to you. Rebecca took the document with shaking hands. For years, she'd lived with whispers, with knowing looks, with the implication that somehow she'd been responsible for the fire, and now... Why? She asked. Why are you doing this? Because it's right, Marcus said simply. Because my brother was a monster, and you were his victim. Because you deserved to have the truth known. He pulled out another document. And because I want to provide financial restitution, this is a bank draft for the sum we estimate William stole from you during your marriage, plus interest. Rebecca looked at the amount and laughed, not with joy but with bitter irony. "I don't need your money, Mr. Cole. As you may have heard, I've come into considerable wealth of my own." "Then donate it to your foundation," Marcus suggested. "Bennett House does important work. Let it be William's final payment for the damage he caused." After Marcus Cole left, Rebecca stood at the window, watching the sun set over the mountains. James came up behind her, as he always did, his presence a constant comfort. "How do you feel?" he asked. "Free," Rebecca said slowly. "I thought I'd left William Cole behind years ago, but part of me was still carrying him, carrying the shame, the whispers, the blame. Now it's done. The truth is out. I can finally let it all go." She turned to face her husband, her partner, her love. "You saved me, James. Not just that day outside the general store, but every day since. You gave me the space to heal, the love to grow, the partnership to thrive." "We saved each other," James corrected gently. "You brought life back to this ranch, back to me. You took your pain and turned it into purpose. You're the strongest person I know. Rebecca Morrison." That night, they made love with the tender passion of two people who had weathered storms together and emerged stronger. Afterward, wrapped in each other's arms, Rebecca traced the scar above James's eyebrow, a mark from a horse kick years ago. "We're both scarred," she mused, "inside and out, and both beautiful because of it," James replied. "Our scars tell the story of our survival, of our strength." "My face has scars," Rebecca whispered, echoing the words she'd said so long ago. James smiled and pulled her closer. "That's all right. I need pure love and truth, not luxury. And I found it all in you." Rebecca closed her eyes, content in a way she'd never thought possible. She had her family, her ranch, her purpose, and most importantly, she had love. Real, honest, transformative love. The scars would always be there, a permanent reminder of where she'd been, but they no longer defined her. She was so much more than her past traumas, so much more than what had been done to her. She was Rebecca Morrison, rancher, businesswoman, author, advocate, mother and wife. She was a survivor who had become a warrior, a victim who had become a victor, a broken woman who had been rebuilt into something stronger than before. And as she drifted off to sleep in her husband's arms, in the house they'd built together on land they'd fought to keep, she knew with absolute certainty that she had found her home. Not in a place, but in a person, in a partnership, in pure love and truth. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I'd love to know where you're enjoying this tale from. Are you listening at home, during your commute, or perhaps while working? Please subscribe to the From Wild West channel and share your thoughts in the comments below. What did you think of Rebecca and James's journey? Your feedback means the world to us.